Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the November 19th meeting of the Criminal Justice Policy Advisory Commission. I'm Mark Pelka from the Office of Policy and Management, Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division, and thrilled to have our second to last meeting of the calendar year today. We'll be receiving updates from the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence on two topics. First, on both of them are focusing on emerging responses to victims of domestic violence. The first part concerns the dominant aggressor arrest policy, and the second concerns the online restraining order applications. So we're very lucky to have Karen Jarmock as well as Dan Cargill from the coalition to deliver a presentation in that respect. Because of the kind of truncated timeline between the previous meeting and this one, we have not undergone full review of our monthly indicators report. Historically, we bring that report to these meetings to share with the group and receive reactions. There's various days in the beginning of the month when the data come in from the various agencies and branches, and it proved to be it proved to be impossible for us to complete it and share the review in order for us to come to you with a kind of fully blessed or reviewed report. So we expect it will be on the website by next week. We're required to post by the end of each month. And we will bring copies to the December CJPAC meeting and walk through the highlights with members to give them a chance to review, as well as looking at the December monthly indicators report for discussion there. We've had an additional kind of staff change in our division I wanted to update you about. And we were very lucky to bring on a new member of our team named Chidi Nuanelli, who will be lead on the Burn JAG grant, as well as the RSAT grant, Project Longevity Program Administration, as well as several others. So he has a great background working. He's a Quinnipiac University grad, and he worked at the council governments of Southern Connecticut in Hamden, as well as the town of Hamden, and he was also an intern for State Rep Brandon McGee. So thrilled to have that member of our team. I know that he'll be appearing in front of the commission in future months, and we are optimistic that the special conditions that have been placed on the Burn JAG grant that have prevented us from being able to accept the award has a greater likelihood in the next federal administration of being addressed. There's obviously ongoing court litigation over the Burn JAG grant that has enabled us to compete for, receive, but not be able to accept the Burn JAG grant, which is depended upon by state agencies and local criminal justice agencies, law enforcement, and more. So we are talking to the National Association representing administering agencies over Burn JAG, and we are optimistic that in the coming months we'll have a positive update regarding our ability to accept and then our ability to distribute those funds, both the discretionary version grant that we have, as well as the funds to support local violent crime reduction efforts. So that's been a frustrating period. It's extended from the fiscal 27 all the way to the fiscal 2020 Burn JAG grant. I was going to ask if we go through the minutes first, and then we can kind of pivot quickly to the first agenda topic. I wondered if anyone had any feedback on the draft minutes that I distributed from the previous meeting.
Motion approved.
Thank you, sir. That's Chief State's Attorney Colangelo. A second for the motion?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I wanted to mention two quick things just before turning to Karen and to Dan. Actually, first, I think I also have Melissa Conway, who's a planning analyst member of our team. She's administrator of the Violence Against Women Act grants, the STOP and the SASP, to serve victims and survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. And Melissa's been working with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence in preparation for today's meeting, and she'll be doing a bit of overview. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask for a moment of personal privilege for your chairman here to share that news was announced on Monday that Karen Jarmak would be leaving the Coalition Against Domestic Violence to take on a new position at the Hartford, where she'll be serving as Assistant Vice President Sustainability Leader. She was obviously in that position before I started, but I followed and admired her from my previous position. I know the commission would probably like to share some words with Karen, and I'm sorry, she's probably going to be angry at me for bringing this up right in the beginning, but I'm indulging in my role to thank her so much for Karen's years of service, of course, on behalf of victims and survivors as the director and CEO of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and also as a member of our commission, and just the impact that she's brought in bringing the needs and concerns of victims and survivors to the commission. I felt it from my very first meeting, serving a few seats down from Karen on this commission, and just saw the way that her presence enhances, enriches, broadens, and deepens the discussions that we have as a group of criminal justice leaders that come together on a monthly basis to touch on the topics that are reaching the fore of concern for the residents of our state. I've seen Karen and her tremendous leadership on behalf of her member centers, the Safe Connect program, victims and survivors, in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic, as you've heard her speak in front of us. I was at an event just last month where she was alongside 3 directors of member centers, advocating on behalf of them for budgetary needs resulting from housing, basic needs, and other immediate service referrals to intimate partner violence victims. And she just has brought, the numbers speak for themselves about the impact that her work has had at the coalition in terms of the work that it's done and the impact that it's had. And I guess I felt, as I was processing this news, that along with that work that she did, she also built a leadership team around her. She built a team of people who are ready to manage the transition and take the next steps into an even brighter future for the coalition. And that truly, Karen, is what a leader is all about. It's someone who's not just bringing impact and making a difference while in that seat, but it's also preparing the organization for the next leaders to step in and for sustainability of the organization. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge up front the news that came out, and we're just I can say with confidence on behalf of the commission how happy we are for you and full of gratitude we are for the difference you've made already and the difference that will be made for our state. Would anyone else care to say anything, or at this point, knowing that we will be having opportunities later when we go around to provide updates, but I want to just allow people any space if they wish to say anything, or Karen if she wishes to speak too.
Well, I will speak. This is Natasha from the Office of Victim Advocate.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm on camera. Sorry, it's not happening this morning. But Karen, I've worked with Karen for 20 years in some capacity. Went from when I first started as PCSW. She has been a strong leader on DV issues and consistent, always highlighting what the next step is, never letting us settle for the systems we have, which I strongly appreciate. And she was also my commissioner at one point, and a rep we worked with. So she's had a long history on working in policy and advocating on behalf of family violence victims. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you, Natasha. Those are beautiful words, and it really speaks to just the years of service and the impact of Karen's work. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.
Mark, if I could just jump in and quickly say, Richard Cho here.
Hi, Richard. Good morning.
And I just want to quickly say, as one of the other non-governmental members invited to sit at this table, Karen, I'm shocked at your news, but also happy for you. You kind of are the mold for what a good statewide advocate and a coalition leader and an intermediary for services can be. And so I've certainly admired your work and tried to follow in your footsteps a bit in how you play that role of holding government accountable, but also doing a good job of stewarding government resources to serve the people that you serve in partnership with all of your members. So anyway, congrats to you, and just want to voice my admiration for your work.
Thank you, Richard.
Hi, Karen. Brian Foley, man. I can't believe it. I'm devastated. I'm going to reach out to you privately and wish you good luck. You know how much I admire and enjoy working with you. This is terrible news for me personally, but best of luck to you, buddy.
Thank you.
Karen, on behalf of the Connecticut Chiefs, I want to wish you best of luck in your next career. We've worked well together, and we've molded some new laws and stuff that have been beneficial to both groups. And I just wish you well in your next career.
Thank you so much.
Karen Carlton-Giles, good success to you. Thanks so much for the insight that you have brought to this important work and the partnership that we've shared. We appreciate it on behalf of the Board of Pardons and Paroles. Good success.
Thank you very much.
Karen, this is Gary Roberge with the Judicial Branch, and you know, it's been a pleasure working with you all these years. We have an excellent working relationship with you all over at CCADV. You've done a tremendous job of leading that organization. I'm going to miss working with you, but good luck in the next chapter, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Rich Colangelo, was it something I did?
Yes. Wait, no. Yeah.
I feel bad now. We're not going to be able to work together.
Yeah, but you know what? There's a great team at CCADV and advocates across the state who are going to be tremendous to work with.
Karen, this is Chris Rapillo. I just want to jump in and thank you that we've been able to have some unusual partnerships.
Yeah.
And I've appreciated your openness to working with us, and I've enjoyed working with you, and I wish you all kinds of luck.
Thank you, Chris.
Karen, I wish you the best. Just a public member here, but it's been a pleasure to watch your leadership through my years on the commission. So I wish you all the best, and I know you're gonna rock where you're going, and you've done a fantastic job in your current position. So thank you for all your time and efforts.
Thank you very much. Well, I just want to thank Mark, and I'm a little embarrassed. Thank you, Mark, for kicking this off. I just love working with you and the team and Melissa. And I'm going to miss these meetings because they've been really interesting. And I honestly feel that we've been able to move a lot of good work together, and there's been strong collaboration that's resulted as a part of our being together each month. I'm really sad to leave CCADV. It's been 10 years and just such a wonderful opportunity for me to wake up each day in this job and feel like I'm making a difference. The role at the Hartford is a really unique opportunity as well, because it encompasses the participation and leadership around things like social responsibility, diversity and inclusionary practices, and governance and ethics. And so I'll sort of be on a different side of this work, but I have a sense that I'll still be reaching out to and connecting with many of you in the role that I will be in. So I'm grateful, and Dan and I are looking forward to providing this presentation this morning. And I'll still be admiring the work that you all do from afar. I won't be that far. And so thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Karen. I truly wrestled with the sequencing, and I was always going to ask you where your preference would be, but I said, you know, she's such a humble person that
either.
I know you would have, and so I'm sorry for my indulgence, but I just I think you really cover. I didn't know that the detail that your position would include the leadership on inclusionary practice, and that's another layer to why I'm so. I feel so that the Hartford is so fortunate to have you in this capacity, because you've demonstrated that inclusionary practice in the work that you've done in the coalition, and I've seen it play out in our work here in the commission when the way that you've asked questions regarding different data analysis provided, different policies or research that was discussed. You were always looking at ways to broaden the scope to be as inclusive as possible and to understand the impact of policies on diverse populations, subpopulations, communities, and demographics in our state. And I remember just different ways that you've encouraged female members of our division to be given an opportunity to present analysis, to be in front of the commission and to work in spaces that are calling out for diverse. So that is a really helpful additional piece. And thank you for saying those kind words, Karen, about the impact of the commission. Obviously, we have a number of boards and commissions that we all serve on. You all serve on as leaders in criminal justice. And I always try for the commission to be an opportunity for people to come together in a welcoming environment to just discuss the latest trends and issues and analysis, and just find opportunities to collaborate, to strategize, to learn what others are doing, and link arms and work together to improve outcomes for the criminal justice system. So thank you. And you came forward, Karen and Dan, months ago with this idea of presenting to the commission today on two topics: the dominant aggressor arrest policy and online restraining orders. It's just a topic that cannot be for the time that we find ourselves in, and the challenges and concerns faced by family violence survivors and victims. And I'm thrilled, Karen, that you invited Dan to join as well. To have a director of law enforcement services at the coalition, this really speaks to the partnership that your advocates and your staff have with law enforcement executives, sworn officers, law enforcement personnel across our state. Melissa Conway, if you don't mind me asking you, I know that you had done a bit of prep work with Karen on the presentation and had done some strategic planning. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to take the floor from here and to officially introduce Karen. Introduce the presentation and Karen's work, and I will be teeing up the presentation to be ready. We'll be playing the role as a supporter and kind of walking through it, but I'll have the slides show up and we'll be walking through it. Melissa, if you're here, please feel free to join us.
Great, thank you. And Karen, I just want to say thank you for all of the work that we've done together over the past 2 years and the collaboration that we've had. And I'm grateful for this last opportunity of collaboration while you're still in your position. So as a little bit of an overview for this commission, I work on our policy planning and implementation side of our division, which is less formally known as the grant side of our division. So I work on many of our different grant programs, including our STOP, domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking grant program. As part of this program, I just want to take a moment to mention that we're required to undergo an implementation plan every 4 years. And I think that many members of this commission were involved in the last round of implementation planning and were able to provide insights into how this funding was used across the state. This is the first time that I'm in my position when we're undergoing the strategic plan, and so I just wanted to share this with the commission in hopes that you might be able to continue to provide insights over the next few months when I reach out or members of our division reach out to hopefully collaborate on how we can best use sexual assault, stalking, domestic violence, dating violence grant funds. As part of the STOP grant, as you all know, we commonly work with CCADV on many projects, including advocacy, training, and support them in those initiatives. And over the last few months, CCADV has been doing some fantastic work regarding setting up an online restraining order process, as well as training on the 2019 implemented dual aggressor or primary aggressor law. So I just wanted to hand the floor over to Karen and Dan Cargill so that they can present on these two topics and dive deeper. And I just want to mention that after they present, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and answers.
So thank you so much, Mark and Melissa. And I know Dan is here. I've lost sight of him, but I know he's here. And so we reached out to Mark and Melissa to just offer this idea that we might update everyone on the dominant. 2019 was the first full year where this new policy was in place. And you might recall, for some of us who have been on the commission for a long time, is that this is something that we looked at for many years and then a statutory change. So we thought it would be interesting for you all to hear about the progress. I really cite Dan Cargill at CCADV as leading this effort and working very collaboratively with Connecticut chiefs and the state police around training and data collection. And then we wanted to just update you on an assessment that CCADV did over the summer to understand this idea of online restraining orders that took place during the pandemic and is now ongoing. It's not a statutory change at this point, but we just wanted to highlight the efficacy of this project. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan to start out this conversation.
Thanks so much, Karen and Dan. This is Mark. I'm here with the slide up, so I'll just try to take cues from you, non-verbal or verbal, on when to proceed to the slides. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you, Karen. We can go right into the next slide and we'll get right into the presentation. So in 2017, CCADV embarked on a year-long review of Connecticut's intimate partner dual arrest rate. Now, I know many in this meeting recall the 1986 the Connecticut Family Violence and Prevention Act was established, creating Connecticut's first mandatory arrest law. And unfortunately, almost immediately in 1987, the Connecticut Legal Services highlighted the unintended consequences of the family violence, which was a high dual arrest rate. And at that time, they reported 37.7%. So a number of years went by, and a number of studies, actually, I believe up to 8 studies were conducted during the 30 years of this high dual arrest rate. But in 2004, the self-defense exception was added to the mandatory arrest law, which unfortunately had little effect on the dual arrest rate. So some of the national data, we do recognize that the national dual arrest rate does vary widely due to different data collection methods. And it appears that Connecticut's intimate partner dual arrest rate was, during the period of time that we were researching, was between 17 and 26% from 2014 to 2018, that 5-year period, which we found was twice the national average of the 7.3% that we found. A number of studies have actually touted a higher dual arrest rate from a national standard or perspective, and a few had a little bit lower, but we found that the 7.3% was about the average. So certainly understanding that there are several barriers in the practice of arresting both parties creates for the victims, including access to domestic violence services from one of CCADV's 18-member organizations, and fear of the criminal justice system, and of course, fear of calling law enforcement for help in the future. The culmination of this year-long review of dual arrest in Connecticut resulted in the 2018 report titled Collective Opportunity for Change, Decades of Dual Arrest in Connecticut. Now, this report highlighted a number of recommendations to lower the intimate partner dual arrest rate, which included potentially changing the state's family violence arrest law, additional training, and leveraging Connecticut's lethality assessment program, which is utilized in every law enforcement agency in Connecticut. Next. So looking at the data, after the release of the 2018 dual arrest report, CCADV and key stakeholders, as well as policymakers, sought to modify the state's family violence law. So the passing, so the bill that was submitted and ultimately passed, Public Act 18-5, allowed Connecticut to join the 27 other states at that time in 2018 with similar dominant aggressor laws. And you'll see the map there. It actually looks much different today, with Connecticut now being in the purple, and a few other states that are actually, we're watching to see how Connecticut handled and implemented the dual arrest. So there will be a few more states, including, I believe, North Carolina, that will have a dominant aggressor law in the future. So this public act provides specific definitions of a dominant aggressor and establishes the 5 determining factors for police officers to use when determining which person is the dominant aggressor, while maintaining the ability for officers to make dual arrests when necessary. So if you recall, some of the what officers shall consider is the need to protect victims of domestic violence, and the fact that that was first in the list of items they need to consider is very indicative of the views of the legislature. Whether one person acted in defense of themselves or a third person, the relative degree of any injury, if there were any threats creating a fear of physical injury, and then any history of family violence that could be obtained by law enforcement reasonably. So,
sorry, Dan, was that premature of me? I can move back. So sorry.
You're good. Nope, that's good. I'm actually I have it over on my right side, so you're good just the way you are. Thank you.
Thank
so during
you.
the summer, the law was going into effect in January 1st, 2019. So during the summer of 2018, Police Officer Standard and Training Council led a team consisting of members of the Chief State's Attorney's Office, the State Police Academy, Connecticut Police Chiefs Association, and CCADV to develop a statewide training curriculum for law enforcement and advocates. It was really Attorney Patrice Palumbo, many of you may have heard her name, who used to teach domestic violence to the recruits at Post, who really came up with this curriculum, and we supported her in her development of it. But she was a driving force of that. So during November and December, CCADV and Post offered several different trainings for train the trainer classes to ensure there were several opportunities to attend at least one of these trainings. And in fact, a number of the trainers who came to my training also told me they went to the Post training. And although we were teaching the same material, Patrice and myself have a little bit different presentation styles. So they were able to take each of our presentation styles and incorporate it into their own, back at their own departments and domestic violence programs. So each participant had the entire curriculum and all necessary training materials to ensure they were able to train their staff. So CCADV provided ongoing technical support during our quarterly meetings with law enforcement and the domestic violence advocates, and a frequently asked questions roll call style video was produced to support advocates and law enforcement who are working evening shifts, overnight shifts. And these videos were posted on the ctlap.org website to again allow access at any time, particularly in the beginning when people had questions and needed some interpretation. So part of this ongoing training and support system, funding through a grant from the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Violence Against Women, allowed CCADV to provide what we called a second tier implementation and management class, which was led by international trainer Mark Wynn and Dr. David Herschel, who is the prominent researcher. If you Google dominant aggressor in the United States, you'll find his name prominent on most of the research papers. There were also additional trainings to family relations supervisors from court support services to allow them to have the understanding of the law as well. So next, we'll take a look at the data. So from 2014 through 2018, the 5 full years before dominant aggressor law went into effect, you'll notice that Connecticut's dual arrest rate stood between 17 and 26%, depending upon which data you were looking at, whether it was the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection data or the judicial branch data. But both data segments showed a high dual arrest rate. So that is the second figure you see there on the screen, 2014 to 2018. So by the end of that, before we go to the next steps.
Absolutely, yep.
So by the end of the 2019, after the 1 full year of the law being in place, you'll see the dual arrest rate stood between 10% and 16%. Again, seeing that same drop, the same figures from state police data or judicial data. So this is a marked improvement, obviously, in a 1 year to drop that low or drop that much in 1 year is something to say. And of course, I always have been saying this is yet another example of Connecticut's law enforcement and domestic violence programs working together to embrace opportunities to better protect victims of domestic violence, which was echoed earlier in this meeting. So we can go on to the next steps and moving forward. So as we move forward, CCADV will continue the ongoing dialogue with our partners at Police Officer Standard and Training Council, the State Police Academy, law enforcement across the state, and domestic violence programs. These conversations will include the annual reviews of the dual arrest data and strengthening training and best practices available in terms of national tools that are available to put those out into the field. We'll also focus on discussions and trainings to assist prosecutors and members of family violence intervention units to identify best practices. So finally, we'll also provide annual updates to policymakers, which is very important for them to understand their work in this, keep them apprised of the ongoing progress and the implementation, to create any opportunities to discuss further implementation or improvements to the Connecticut's family violence arrest laws. And I'll just say, yesterday, CCADV staff and key stakeholders met to review the dominant aggressor issue brief and discussed the next steps. So CCADV will be working with POST, the Police Officer Standard and Training Council Academy staff, state police staff, and other key stakeholders to develop additional training resources to continue, again, to drive the dual arrest rate lower if possible, but certainly to examine on a yearly basis, if not on a more regular basis, to understand more clearly our dual arrest rates and the change that has been made. It'll be interesting again to see what impact COVID had on dual arrest here in Connecticut, and we will continue to examine that in the coming months and coming years. So the last piece I'd like to kind of review and discuss has really nothing to do with the dual arrest, but I just wanted to make this body aware of the Homicide Investigative Toolkit that was developed. So this was developed in cooperation with the Department of Public Health, the Division of Criminal Justice, and CCADV's Fatality Review Task Force. Within this toolkit, and a few of you here in this meeting were actually part of the task force that created this toolkit. Each chapter within this toolkit is designed to assist agencies with best practices, adaptable forms, checklists, and specific recommendations to aid in the investigation of intimate partner domestic violence homicides. But it also is applicable to other complex investigations. It's easier to say what this toolkit is not, and it certainly is not a how to investigate a homicide. We rely on the investigative agencies across the state. Their investigators should be receiving advanced training on how to investigate complex cases, but it gives specific details that have been learned over decades of experience in the field. And particularly at this point in time, at least I am seeing a number of key leaders across the state who are retiring in the major crime fields. And this toolkit will certainly supplement and assist with transition as new detectives come on and current detectives get promoted into their roles as leaders. So this toolkit is going to be out there. I'll be training law enforcement in the coming months. We'd actually hope to have the training already completed by now, but with COVID, this certainly has put a wrench in the works. But we will be working in the coming months to do some virtual training. And again, the Department of Public Health is going to be funding some training videos as additional resources for law enforcement to review after the initial training.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. That's all I've got.
Karen, do you think that we should pause just to see if there are questions about this? I wait to the end to do everything.
I like that idea. I think that could, depending on time, I know this just went a little bit over, but if that works for you, I think that's a great idea.
Thanks, Karen. That's a great idea. Members of the commission, any questions for Karen or Dan about the content presented so far? Okay.
This is Melissa Conway. I have a quick question for you. So I know your data, you looked at DESP's data and judicial's data. I'm curious if you've done a more qualitative analysis, or if there is a plan to talk to your 18 member centers and those at the advocacy level to see if they've seen a change in the services they provided, or what victims and survivors are reporting to them regarding dual arrest.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And yes, we do plan on that from a internal perspective, but also I'm happy to report that Dr. Herschel has agreed to do a in-depth research on our dual arrest and all of the data over the last 10 years, which will include obviously 2019. We are, because of the systems we have set up and the relationships that we have developed here in Connecticut, to see this degree of inclusion and the adoption of the dual arrest law or the dominant aggressor law is something that has not been seen before in his research. So he is very curious to understand how we were able to accomplish this. Many other states have not seen these results for many years.
Thank you. And also, Melissa, to get to your question, so Dan is also sharing the data by town with each of the domestic violence organizations. So they will know regionally what the dual arrest rate looks like within their community. And then that gives them the opportunity to be reaching out to their local law enforcement agency and talking through that dual arrest rate and working, side by side. If it needs to be better, if it's in a good place, how do they keep it there? So that's the benefit of, it's not in the report, but Dan's been really diligent around making sure that each of those sites has their own regional dual arrest information, and each law enforcement agency.
Karen and Dan, are you looping in the state's attorneys on that? Because they should be looped in if they're not, because they could help with those conversations and have them so they can understand what's going on.
I don't know, Dan, do you know? I don't know the answer to that. It's a great suggestion. Do you know, Dan?
So that was actually part of my thought process yesterday during the meeting. Kevin Lawler was on the meeting we had. So that was part of my thought, is making sure that he is roped in on this.
Karen and Dan, this is Mark. I was really moved by Dan's references to the impact of dual arrest on victims and survivors regarding their ability to access services, their perhaps apprehension of calling for help in an instance of family intimate partner violence. Has there been any anecdotal or empirical data about the impact of the law change on police in terms of their safety and the improvements therein with having the training and the changed the amended policies regarding responding to a situation?
Well, I think law enforcement has embraced this change and to be allowed to make the determination and of who the dominant aggressor is, and only feel that they have to arrest one party. So in terms of their safety and the safety of the victims, I think they've embraced it very well.
Thanks, Dan. That's very helpful. I remember well your presentation, I think it was in May, about the lethality assessment program and looking at some of the data and the access to the LAP line that police officers have. So I'm appreciating how it's a big composite picture of interconnected efforts here. So thank you. Thanks, Karen. I think back to you.
Okay, so we just wanted to talk through quickly and bring to everyone's attention. Mark, if you could just go to the next slide after this, to talk about the idea of an online restraining order application, which emulated, quite honestly, from the pandemic. So while the pandemic has offered really significant challenges in a lot of ways to people in their personal lives and then to systems, there's been some interesting, which I'm sure many of you have experienced as well, new ways of approaching our work that have emulated from the experience of the pandemic. So as many of you know, the governor issued an executive order for people to stay at home if they were not deemed essential. That occurred in March of this year. The judicial branch, understandably, started to close the announced court closures and the consolidation of courts from 19 to 6 locations with limited hours of operation, with the very viable idea of wanting to keep staff and litigants safe during the pandemic. Protocols for priority 1 cases did continue to exist. So domestic violence was continued to be viewed within the system as a priority. And what that meant, therefore, is that victims could still physically go to one of those 6 locations to apply for a restraining order. But as we know, especially for underserved communities, the idea of trying to get to a location further away, whether it's a transportation barrier, a language barrier, whether they have fears about going into court, the closures had some unintended consequences, and that is not at all a criticism of the judicial branch's decision to close courts. We understand that, but we just were working very actively with the judicial branch to try to develop some solutions to keep victims safe. I should note that domestic violence advocacy at this time in March also shifted almost completely to mobile advocacy. So there was limited interaction where advocates were actually going to court, limited in communities. Advocates continued to work in domestic violence shelters, but for the most part, advocates were reaching out, and I'll get to those statistics like never before through a mobile platform. So you can go to the next slide, Mark. And so we know that while the stay-at-home orders are meant to protect people from COVID-19, for someone who's suffering from domestic violence, what that means is that their home environment may not be a safe place. It has its own set of risks. And from a financial standpoint, we knew that we heard on our statewide hotline about victims who were grappling with a host of things ranging from financial hardship due to the pandemic, whether they lost a job or there were other implications, trying to teach their children at home, and also have the pressure of the ongoing abuse from their partner while living in the home. And we also know that the pandemic did inadvertently decrease options for safety for victims. Systems changed, understandably, but it was more difficult for victims to access the established points for support. And so that is why, next slide, Mark, we worked really collaboratively with the judicial branch to develop a solution. Just to give you some context around the impact, so we saw a 30% increase in outreach to CT Safe Connect, which, as we know, is the statewide hub for assistance. So that's where each of the 18 domestic violence organization sites, their localized hotlines are feeding into that network, as well as individuals can be texting, calling, emailing, or live chatting from the www.CT Safe Connect platform. What was interesting is more than half of the individuals, nearly 60%, we've never heard from before. So there was a huge increase in individuals reaching out for the first time during the pandemic. Understandably, when I was referring to mobile advocacy, outreach by advocates increased 64%. So what that meant is that they were outreaching, checking in on individuals around their safety very, very actively during the pandemic. So there's a lot of outreach that occurred during the pandemic and continues to as this uptick that we are experiencing. We also found that calls were complicated and often volatile. And so there was a need for advocates to spend more time sifting through all of these complexities with victims at a really critical time in their life. Also, many of you might have heard in the news, we had to decompress the number of individuals in domestic violence shelters so that we could comply with social distancing standards. What that means is that shelters are at 125% on average in Connecticut annually. And so we had to start shifting families and individuals to hotels to support their health and safety. And that means advocates were working with families in shelters and in hotels. At this point, since March, and that's an old, it just changes by the day, there's been over $430,000 spent on hoteling through the pandemic. Next slide. And so we also heard from victims around their concerns related to the pandemic. Many were experiencing unemployment circumstances. They were concerned about when their benefits would run out. They were concerned about when the eviction moratoriums would run out. They were worried about work and their need for childcare, but childcare centers not being open. They were really struggling with remote learning at home for their children while they're trying to maintain a job and keep the temperature, for lack of a better term, in the household at a place where it wasn't volatile. And so there was just a lot of pressure on families who are experiencing domestic violence during the pandemic. On a positive note, the Domestic Violence Rapid Rehousing Project, which is funded through HUD and DOH, was really beneficial during the pandemic. So we were able to actively house 52 families from March through August. And part of that was due to the fact that HUD relaxed their regulations. So it's an example where a federal agency can shift when necessary. And so we were able to do virtual inspections, for example, or pay for rent for a few months, which was very unusual. So it really offered a great opportunity to keep people safe and to offer sustainability to them. And so we really worked actively with the judicial branch and Connecticut Legal Services to develop a way for individuals to utilize a restraining order as a legal remedy. We know that restraining orders are not the only mechanism to keep victims and survivors safe, but it's an important one. And we wanted to be sure that individuals did not lose that option as a safety option with the court closures. And so the judicial branch worked with the governor's office to have an executive order approved on April 2nd, which allowed for the very first time for victims of domestic violence to apply for a restraining order online. We wanted to, on our end, make sure that our legal advocacy project created a number of supports to that idea. We worked together to create protocols. For example, clerks traditionally work to have the order served by the marshal. We offered to have advocates play that role, knowing how stressed the clerks were in terms of the volume of their work during this time. There was tremendous amount of outreach, especially through social media, to make sure that people knew that help was available, that they could apply for an order online, that they could go right to ctsafeconnect.org and an advocate could help them do that, bilingual, bicultural, 24/7. There was a lot of communication happening within systems, clerks, marshals, advocates, to make this new platform work. Next slide. And we knew that there was a significant decrease in restraining order applications when and thank you to the judicial branch for working with us and offering this this data, but you can see the drop month by month in terms of the number of applications when you compare the period of the pandemic to the period of time before, which basically equates to an over 50% drop in restraining order applications statewide during the pandemic. And so we decided to assess basically CCADV's reaction to all of this. We wanted to make sure, oh, go ahead, Mark, the next slide.
Sorry, I'm bad at this. Thank you.
So there's a report online whereby we worked to understand how did CT Safe Connect support this online option. We captured feedback from survivors, court clerks were very helpful, marshals and advocates. On the whole, it was very positive. We know this is a learning process, but we gained a lot of knowledge. We know that the average length of time it would take if someone reached out to Safe Connect, for example, was about 45 minutes. We learned that the language access that this offered through Safe Connect was really beneficial. And the indirect also option was that if individuals were reaching out, wanting to understand the process for a restraining order or the application, that basically they could also be talking about other safety options. Maybe it's housing, maybe it's food insecurity, whatever that might be, they can also safety plan with an advocate. And so we learned that Safe Connect advocates assisted from April to June with 172 applications. Victims did on their own. We learned that through the judicial branch data that they applied. There are people who are going online on their own and applying for orders, and also the advocates working out in the 18 sites assisted with 423 inquiries relative to the TRO process. And so moving forward, CCADV is very supportive of the idea, and will likely include this in our policy priorities for 2021, is making this a statutory change. Right now, the executive order is still in place. It is still an opportunity for us to utilize the online process, but we are hoping to make this a permanent change in the upcoming session. We recognize that there's a need for ongoing training and technical assistance. This was a very viable option for victims and survivors, but we need to make it better. We need to ensure that there's good assessment and support for both the victim and the advocate when they're working to understand whether or not a restraining order is a safety option for someone at that point in time. Marshals indicated it would be really helpful to them to get more identifiable information. They have a hard time locating the respondents when an order has been issued. And so there's that opportunity to be working together to make sure they have that information, because at the end of the day, it makes it safer for victims. Also, marshals indicated that the opportunity for new policy standards around the electronic transfer of court documents to include email or fax rather than the actual physical piece of paper. And we did find that CCADV developed a poster, and it was in the court window when courts were closed, but the chance that we have to work with judicial to perhaps have these always posted so that people know that, yes, they can go into court and apply for an order, but they could also to do that online. And then I apologize, Mark, the bar on the bottom is keeping me from seeing the last point.
It's ongoing data collection and assessment and ongoing outreach strategies, I believe.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that we're ongoing offering this idea that people can go to Safe Connect and or on their own apply for an order. And our best option that we found is through social media to do that. We're also getting ready to resource our PSA campaign for 2021 and want to make sure that this is a part of the messaging around that. And then we also, in the upcoming year, want to continue to collect data and get feedback from the various stakeholders to learn how we can continue to make this better.
Okay.
So I don't know if people have questions. The report is hosted on our website from this summer, and it has a lot of good information in there.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll step off from the sharing and just come back to the meeting and say thank you very much for that. I was struck by how many of the initiatives that were underway at CCADV that you presented to the Commission on, Karen, from the rapid rehousing pilot to the Safe Connect rollout. I remember when you first announced the launch of Safe Connect, and I had the pleasure of joining with Melissa Conway to visit visit that space, that there was such an array of communication capabilities made available to communicate with survivors, multilingual, text messaging, emailing, chatting, and verbal, and so much more. But clearly that creates something of a, thank goodness those resources and tools were in place, given how fast things were developing, as your presentation covers. I'm wondering if members of the Commission have questions or reactions to this part of the presentation. I wanted to just ask Karen, maybe just to get things sort of started, is in terms of like longer term thinking for where you see the online restraining order form and other measures attached to this. I guess, what do you see as kind of priorities for kind of building on the impacts of these interventions in ways that will enable post-pandemic for better, more swifter and more kind of intensive delivery of services to survivors?
Well, I think the key thing that we learned, and we always learn, not just with restraining orders, but with advocacy in general, is access. And so access around language, access around information, and access for capabilities to be able to keep yourself and or your family safe. And so, it's hard for people to sometimes find information, and I think that's always our big challenge. How do we make sure that if someone is wanting to apply for an online order, or for them to even know that this option exists, where is that prominently perhaps? And I know it's so hard for judicial because there's so much information and there are so many constituencies whom they're serving, but is there a way to highlight that, to have a little, access button somehow front and center on that site? We will certainly be exploring how we might be able to do that if this becomes a statutory change, because the key thing, I think, is the knowledge and the understanding for people when they need help, to not make it so difficult for them to access the information and understand the process.
That makes a lot of sense.
Karen, going off of that, I noted that you had said at one point that going online with your services posed an increase in individuals that you've never been able to reach before. And I'm just curious if you just talked about access, but if you have a breakdown of those individuals, how you know that information. I would think it might be from CT Safe Connect. And if you have a breakdown of demographics or other information of that nature that might allow you to look into that and see how you can move forward to continue to reach populations that you haven't reached before.
Yeah, so the data point is that we realized that individuals reaching out to CT Safe Connect are individuals that we had never heard from before. And we know that outcomes database, it's a confidential database, but within the advocacy system, we have the ability to know if someone has ever been a part of the domestic violence system, which is an important piece of information to have, to know that I'm talking to Jane Doe here on Thursday, but oh, I didn't realize 2 years ago she was at the Prudence Crandall Center, right? So that's helpful for the advocate to have that knowledge. So that's how we understood that through ETO, that we had not ever touched people in this way before. We also know, and Dan leads the Connecticut Domestic Violence Fatality Review Task Force. We know, and I think Dan, help me out if this continues to be a circumstance, but in the majority of domestic violence homicides in the state of Connecticut, which averages around 12 to 14 annually, these are individuals we've never touched before. And that's frustrating to us because we're realizing at these most critical times, we're not touching them. So it's always a really difficult task, and something we talk about actively in terms of how are we reaching people? How are we creating access? How are we doing that in multiple languages through multiple efforts around cultural competency? To ensure that the idea of that help is available 24/7, bilingual, bicultural, is more recognized statewide.
Thank you.
Great question, Melissa. Thank you. I remember that Kevin and Kyle from the research unit in our division were reviewing the materials, and I'm not sure if you folks feel that you already had the kind of data or research related questions answered, but I want to give you folks a chance to talk and also just to note the collaboration that our division has enjoyed with Dan on some of the additional analysis of the data. Certainly the aggregate high level immediate key takeaways was provided, and it's been a pleasure of us to be part of kind of next steps and next iterations.
Mark, hi, this is Kevin, and hi, Karen and Dan. Nice to see you again. I did have actually a quick kind of follow-up question about the presentation that Karen just gave, and my follow-up really is sort of, I noticed when you were kind of presenting the numbers of the online applications, comparing kind of restraining orders from 2020 to 2019, and you said there was kind of a 50% drop this year. But from looking at those numbers, it looked like by August, September, that volume was starting to increase. So what I'm wondering is, I know it's very difficult to kind of stand up a new platform like this, but now that there's some familiarity and some awareness out there. Do you feel like, especially with COVID cases rising again, that gap is narrowing, and that this going ahead there won't be as significant, perhaps a drop off in restraining order applications kind of going forward versus kind of what you experienced back in the spring?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think hopefully Gary can help me out a little bit, because we correlated the drop in the restraining order applications with the court closures. And what we did find is that, and we've been monitoring this ongoing, so we included the data from the report, but we've been watching this ongoing. And as courts started to reopen, we saw the applications starting to increase again. But with the knowledge that individuals are continuing to select to go into court. So Gary, I don't know if, I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't know if you have any feedback around that, but that's one area where there was that drop at the height, and then it started to get a little better, and it sort of correlated with the courts reopening. Gary might have walked away. I don't know. Sorry.
I'm here. I was just having trouble unmuting my mute button. So,
Sorry.
no, I think that's a fair statement. And you know, we saw a drop off in most all of our business during that time period, and it's starting to increase again as we have now gotten back to business in all of our court locations. But you know, I just want to comment on your presentation and on the information. And you know, I think it's working out very well. You know, we have all the information, how to access it. Like you were saying, Karen, maybe there could be a more efficient way of getting to it, but we have so much information on our COVID pages on the branch website about how to access our services electronically, right? And I think we're going to continue to see cases, applications increase over time. And I know we've been getting a lot of emails. They're sent to us by way of email. That's how the branch receives the applications. A lot of emails for electronic applications. But you know, I think the reduction and now the increase was across the board for the branch with respect to all of our business, and the same for the applications for the temporary restraining orders.
Thank you both for those answers. I appreciate it.
You know, the other thing that I should have said is that I think, Karen, you would agree that I think the communication and the cooperation between the clerk's offices and your Safe Connect site has really done a nice job of being able to communicate back and forth information on these applications, you know, based on the way we changed our business because of the reduction in court locations. And now we're back up all of our courts running. But I really think court operations and your Safe Connect folks did a really good job of coordinating and focusing on these applications and working with the applicants to make sure that they were as safe as possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There's just been this sort of renewed, ongoing collaboration back and forth, you know, making sure, you know, sometimes someone would fill out an application physically and submit it, and there might be a piece of information missing. They might have left court, and you know, here there's just continuous back and forth where the advocate can then reach out to the victim, get that information, go back to the clerk, and then back and forth around getting that order served. So it's really been very, to me, it's impressive.
That's helpful very much. Any last few thoughts or questions from members of the group? Anyone who hasn't had a chance to raise one, or someone's on their mind they want to pose? I just was thinking about kind of shelter diversion elements that were part of this. Both the Karen is stressing the rollout of the rapid rehousing pilot, and she was also stressing help with fighting, with prohibiting issues of eviction, providing first and last month's rent, and support with utilities. I just thought that was a really, it's a message I've heard Richard Cho talk a lot about regarding some of the ways that kind of early intervention and shelter diversion can be achieved with kind of timely infusions of temporary support, can avoid someone having to take that, for appropriate populations, having to take that route into shelter or more intensive means.
Yeah, we anticipate the cost of hoteling at the end of the day, once through the pandemic, will be about $1 million. And so 4CT recently provided 150,000 to leverage 450 from FEMA. And then we're waiting on feedback from one philanthropic foundation around hopefully some additional support so that the sites can be reimbursed and or for the cost of hoteling victims.
If I could, Mark and Karen, just jump in here. I think we've certainly learned the value of shelter diversion and providing flexible financial assistance for people who are coming to the front door of the homeless system. The DV shelter system has a different front door that Karen's organization helps to manage. One of the challenges, well, first I want to say, the pandemic and the need to divert people from congregate shelters became certainly more urgent. And as much as we were working to move people from congregate shelters to hotels, we also realized we needed to step up diversion efforts so that newer people who are seeking either DV shelters or other homeless shelters would not have to enter congregate settings. And I think we learned both the power and the value of that flexible financial assistance. At the same time, the challenges, the feast and famine dynamic of having to rely on a patchwork of different funding streams to pay for that flexible financial assistance. Some comes from the state, some now through CARES Act dollars that we've been able to receive. And as Karen mentioned, we're able to receive a grant from 4CT as well for shelter diversion assistance. But we are all worried about both what happens in the future as CARES Act dollars end. We also worry about the pending flood of evictions that happens once the moratorium ends on January 1st, and whether that will be extended or not. I know judicial branch is certainly concerned about that as well. But so I think this is probably more of a housing issue than a criminal justice issue, but I think it does have impacts on a number of people who are justice involved. That we could see fairly significant shocks to the in terms of housing needs across the board for both survivors of domestic violence, people experiencing homelessness, people discharged from correctional settings, people on probation. So it is a collective challenge that I think we all need to solve when 2021 comes.
Thank you very much, Richard. A reminder to me of just the timelines, watching the month to month, just helped me appreciate just the suddenness of when all changed seemingly with the declaration of the emergency orders and the onset of the pandemic, and just the ways that direct service providers, advocates, administrators and leaders who just had to work together day to day to help people who were affected by the pandemic in profound ways. So thank you everyone for your work from all the way across the board for the members of this commission. Well, I was hoping to transition a bit to our next topic, but before I did that, just say thank you so much to Karen and to Dan Cargill for their presentation today. The CJPAC website includes both of the issue briefs as well as the presentation that was delivered today for anyone who wishes to return to it and review it in more detail. I think they're all great products, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thought we could use our the remainder of the meeting to go through agency and individual and CJPAC subcommittee updates. So I was wondering if I might start with the folks who I am so lucky to see presented on my screen. And if you need to pass, feel free to. But I don't know if I could put the illustrious member of the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, Brian Foley. Would you care to start and with any updates on behalf of the agency, sir?
No, I'm going to pass. We got a lot going on, but if you have anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for everything and for the work that we've done separately on a host of different issues on behalf of cities. Thank you.
All right.
Chief Kenny, anything you wish to share at this time, sir?
Really not much other than the fact that we're seeing a dramatic increase in our check welfare requests. We've in a 3-month period have exceeded that was during the first COVID period. So we're concerned as the pandemic goes on about the mental health of our citizens and our impact. And I'm sure Brian probably mirrors the same thing with the state police. So it's going to be a long couple months.
Thank you, Chief, for mentioning that. And I'm not sure if a member of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services is here, but are you just describing, sir, that calls from just mental health checks, suicidality risks, and other sort of I'm thinking that way perhaps because of just the fact that people are remaining, shifting back, especially indoors, and the crisis is really setting in more and more profound ways. Is that what you're describing, sir?
I don't know, really can't explain what the cause is, the causation is, but we're seeing many more calls for assistance, both from our social worker providers, CHR, but also from the citizens. And we're shipping a lot of people to receive treatment on we call it a check welfare, an emergency committal. It's becoming a daily routine at this point.
I got to say, suicides have got to be going up. I cannot wait to see these numbers, or I'm scared to see these numbers out of the OCME when they start putting them out. I kind of feel like it's the overdose situation all over again, where we kind of didn't get the real numbers until the epidemic was the overdose epidemic was well underway. I'm concerned these suicide numbers are going to be like nothing we ever have seen before. And thanks, Chief Kenny, for bringing that up.
I appreciate that too. Karen and I attended a event last month in which an announcement was made for some temporary support for some of the hoteling costs that were borne by domestic violence program providers. And the other topic that was highlighted from Commissioner Delphin-Rittman and Commissioner Durantis was a new grant over 5 years to help with suicide reduction. And I know Commissioner Delphin-Rittman highlighted these issues. So this might be worth something to touch on if we can have a bit of an update at the next meeting or a more detailed presentation. Many thanks to Brian and to Chief Kenny for raising it. I was going to ask if Beth Hamilton would care to go next, and then after Beth, I'm so happy to see Ms. Deneen, Lori Deneen, you would be more than welcome to go after Beth if you wish for your update. Beth, anything you care to share at this point?
Sure, I'll just briefly, I think a lot of our updates are probably mirroring other folks. I know Lucy gave a good update last month around the rollout of our sort of new technology platforms to use both text and chat. And I think Karen and her team really did a great job of highlighting why that is so successful and so important, that we as service providers are finding new ways to reach survivors and link them with an ease of access to get information, referrals, support services. We also, like other folks, will be closing our offices upcomingly after the 2 holidays. Largely so that folks can both we can keep both our survivors we serve safe, but also so that our staff can isolate following any holiday gatherings. Some of our membership is doing that also, but all of our services across the state remain fully intact, albeit remotely in some places. We also have proactively been reaching out statewide to all of our emergency departments and police departments to cement plans for our response, our remote responses as COVID is ramping up again. We know that there'll be less access to in-person advocacy and accompaniments at times, so we want to make sure that we have every avenue we can set up successfully to continue to support survivors. And then just very, very briefly, I would say that, the Alliance has ongoingly been a part of a national cohort of community partners as well as other sexual assault coalitions to explore the implications for increasing access to alternative forms of justice for victims and survivors. Here in Connecticut, we certainly have begun having conversations about restorative and transformative justice, but those conversations have largely centered on the perpetrators of the crimes rather than the victims of their crimes. And so in an effort to be responsive to the many survivors who reach out to the Alliance for such support and access to alternative forms of justice each year, we are starting to really look to being able to work with survivors, stakeholders, policymakers, and advocates to create more spaces in Connecticut, both here at the Coalition and beyond, quite frankly, to explore the promise held by restorative justice practices for victims and survivors. So I would hope that upcoming, possibly in the spring, we would have both more news to share, but possibly be able to highlight that for this group to really see how that can work in service of survivors, both on the criminal justice side as well as in just advocacy practices.
Beth, thank you very much for that update. Indeed, Lucy gave a really helpful update at the last meeting about the text-to-talk platform, and the Victim Issues Subcommittee, which Natasha chaired, had a great discussion yesterday. So thanks for adding more detail and texture. I appreciate it. Ms. Deneen, next up, please. And then after Ms. Deneen, I'd like to ask Gary Roberge from the court, and then Richard Cho, and we'll keep going down the line. Ms. Deneen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I have nothing to add from the public member stance, but I appreciate all the work that's being done, as if it's not challenging enough, given the current circumstances. Everybody's just doing a wonderful job. So thank you. I won't hold up the time.
Thank you very much for your update and for your support and just the spirit that you bring to the work. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Director, you're up next, sir, if you don't mind. And
Okay.
yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Judge Carroll's on. I don't know if Judge Carroll would like to go first. I think.
Oh my gosh.
There I go. Yes. Good morning, everybody.
Judge, good to see you in ages.
Hi, Mark. How you doing?
Video. Great to see you. Good morning, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Not at all. As always, I'm going to defer largely to Gary, but a couple things that I would like to say. You know, with respect to the court system, since the beginning days of the pandemic, our number one goal has been to mitigate the spread of the virus, keep our staff, judges, and stakeholders safe while we continue to discharge our constitutional responsibilities. That's been a big challenge, obviously, because so much of what is done, particularly in the criminal courts, has to be done in person. We've done a great job on the family and civil side in creating and operating on a virtual function. But even the ability to expand the virtual functionality is a resource issue and is constrained largely by available funding. To the extent that we wish to be able to expand our virtual platform, it's going to require additional funding. And I'm a little disappointed that of all of the CARES funds applications that the judicial branch has made, we've only been granted about 60% of our requests. So that's limited our ability to expand that virtual footprint. In the criminal courts, we've had remarkable cooperation from the Chief State's Attorney and the Chief Public Defender. They've been very patient, very cooperative, and very eager to work with us in getting remote processes up within the courts that work. And I'm very grateful to Rich and Chris for that continued cooperation. When we suspended operations in some of our court facilities, I prefer to say suspend operations than closed courts, because our courts never really closed. We were continuing office operations in all of our facilities while we had to suspend operations so we could make physical alterations within our buildings to make them safe so our staff could return to those buildings, and on a limited basis we could bring the public back into those buildings. As soon as we got funding and made the purchases and installed all that PPE, we were able to bring our staff back and our judges back and reopen those facilities. So there's no confusion. Virtually every single one of our courts is open. All of our offices are open, and all of our staff was summoned back to work in court and office locations back on September 14th. Now, of course, as the virus is spiking a bit, we're doing more to reduce the number of in-court staff and further expand the scope of our remote functionality. But through it all, we have tried to anticipate what the so-called unintended consequences might be by the way we'd alter our operations, because we wanted to know what all the consequences would be. And that's what ultimately led to the creation of the remote temporary restraining order process. And I would be remiss if I did not extend my gratitude to the judges, particularly Judge Albus and Judge Bizzuto, all of the court ops and all the CSSD staff, our legal staff, for working closely with the governor's office to draft the executive order that permitted us to conduct the temporary restraining order process on a remote basis. And I also have to extend gratitude to our tech staff for creating the technical infrastructure that was necessary for us to develop and deploy that remote TRO process. So I want to extend my gratitude again to all of those individuals who were so instrumental in creating the program for us. As we look forward to the new legislative session, I think it's important that we keep in mind that the provisions of the executive order that allowed for the remote processing of these applications, we're doing that now only by virtue of the provisions of that executive order. We had hoped that in the special session that was conducted this summer, that that process would be made permanent by including that on the agenda for the special session, but the legislature did not do that. So as we move into a new legislative session, we have to make sure that the law is changed to permit us to continue to do so. So with that background, I'll turn it over to Gary, who can perhaps give a more granular update on what we're doing in the branch.
Okay, thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just real quick, we continue to increase capacity virtually, both in our courthouses, as Judge Carroll was just talking about. And I got to thank Commissioner Karros. I've been doing that on every monthly call that we've had with Department of Correction. They're really been good partners in creating virtual capacity in their facilities so that we can have more hearings with and dispositions with respect to the individuals that are currently incarcerated, and program placements, right? We're placing people in residential programs right out of the Department of Correction through virtual hearings. We've placed 164 to date since the pandemic began. What we're seeing now operationally, the transitional houses that we're running, we've had a couple of positive COVID cases in those, so that obviously affects our operations, right? And where we can place people that need housing, like Dr. Cho was speaking about earlier. We're working with the Department of Housing to possibly fund an additional rapid rehousing program. I've talked before in these meetings about the success we're having in our New Haven program with the Columbus House and the work we're doing there because of the housing issues that we're up against in the branch, just to wrap it up and what Judge Carroll was talking to earlier, great cooperation with the Chief Public Defender's Office and the Division of Criminal Justice. We're expanding virtual dockets to hear more cases in the courthouses as we expand our virtual capacity. So there's a lot of progress being made. We've come a long way since March and April, but we still have some work to do. So good progress is being made, and we look forward to working with everybody on this call to continue to make that progress as we work our way through this. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director, and you are spot on. I wish, as someone who helps with the minutes, you have expressed just strong commitment to the interbranch coordination that has helped our state to get through these tremendous challenges since the onset of the pandemic. And you often have signaled out the Corrections Commissioner in those updates, and that's just a real credit to the interbranch coordination and collaboration that has been managed. So, and along with local governments and agencies. So, thank you indeed for your support. Dr. Cho, I'm wondering if you could go next. You're more than welcome to. And in terms of after that, I was thinking DEMIS and Department of Veteran Affairs. If you are on the line, you're more than welcome to go next, but I'll keep working through the list. Dr. Cho, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as has already been mentioned, we're very deep in the implementation of the DOC Reentry Housing Assistance Program that we've been able to create through the partnership with the Office of Policy Management, through the CSF funds that we've been able to receive. We've now contracted with 6 nonprofit community-based providers across the state, so we've now have a statewide reach. And every month we're receiving referrals from DOC's reentry unit in partnership with Director Thibault. Working with Commissioner Karros and the team at DOC, getting roughly about 20 individuals who are within 30 days of hitting their end of sentence and who've been determined that they have no other housing alternatives, in which case DOC makes an electronic referral through our system to one of the 6 nonprofit entities, at which point they do an in-reach and then assist that individual to safely reenter the community, providing both temporary housing as well as connection to permanent housing. I'm working on putting together a better kind of summary of how many individuals have been served thus far. But the work has been great, and we've been holding weekly meetings with both DOC and the providers to just ensure that the client flow is working well and that individuals are being assisted. I will just note that there are pretty significant challenges with housing search these days, where unintended consequence of the eviction moratorium is that landlords are somewhat risk averse with respect to renting with people who don't have current employment, recent employment history, not to mention having criminal convictions. So that's just an ongoing challenge. We're also in conversations with DOC about the potential for extending the reach of this program to people who are being released after pretrial detention, which would become possible if I think arraignments and court hearings could be held virtually. One of the challenges historically has been if people are transported from DOC facilities to courts, it makes it difficult for that handoff to happen between DOC and community-based providers. So I want to just echo Judge Carroll and Director Roberge's kind of point that the more resources that can be provided to enable courts to go virtual would also have the benefit of enabling people who are released after a pretrial detention to be connected to reentry housing assistance as well. And then just the other, on a side note, I'll just share that this week, the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness partnered with the Connecticut Conference on Municipalities to launch a new municipal effort where we're engaging and kind of calling on 169 towns across Connecticut to take action on efforts to end homelessness, including a voluntary list of actions that municipalities can pursue, including working with their local law enforcement and other local municipal human services to coordinate around homeless services in partnership with the statewide coordinated access network system that we've created. So more to come there, but we'll be providing more technical assistance to local police departments, law enforcement agencies, as well as municipal human services about how to address homelessness, particularly as we're seeing instances of panhandling, homeless encampments beginning to grow during this phase during the pandemic. So, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Cho. I appreciate that. And I've really admired how you brought on to your board people like Chief Mello from Milford and State's Attorney Perleski and so many others into this, so that there are champions already who've done this work with homeless populations and now can reach out to their constituents, their counterparts, their peers, their residents about these issues, especially as we head into the cold winter months. I can imagine that the work you're doing is more important than ever. So thank you. I had mentioned perhaps Department of Veterans Affairs and DEMAS to go next, and I did see DOC come on the screen at once, so we could put them for next, and then we'll keep moving through the list. Would DVA or DEMAS care to provide an update today?
Sure, the DVA is on, but did you want the update now?
Sure, that'd be great.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
Well,
sorry about the camera. I can't use it today. This is Jane Siegel with the DVA.
Happy belated Veterans Day, and thank you for joining our meeting. I know the
Thank you very
commission has
much.
a commitment, so thank you. Sorry for cutting you off, but yes.
No,
Thank you.
it's okay. It was a great presentation today, very interesting. So I did appreciate hearing that. Thank you for letting me be here today. The DVA continues to take measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. We continue to conduct point prevalence testing of all veteran residents, patients, and staff. Do have isolation units set up in both our residential and healthcare facilities. I'm hearing a lot about the lack of housing and the issue around that. So I want to remind everybody that our residential program as well as our healthcare facility are open for admissions. So if there's any veteran who is transferring out of DOC, they are encouraged to apply to our residential program. Our program fee for participating in the residential program is income-based. So funding should be a deterrent for anybody to apply. So we would encourage any DOC transfers to apply to our program. So that's my report for today. Thanks again for having me.
Our pleasure, Ms. Siegel. And your update reminded me of Commissioner Sadi's reminder about asking, have you served? The populations we may not realize have our veteran status, and the benefit of asking, have you served, is a way of eliciting that information and perhaps routing someone more swiftly and directly to services. Thank you for always attending. And I hope I got that up, my perspective right on your understanding of that. And I think a lot of good can come to people.
Thank you.
Dr. Norco, I was wondering if you wanted to go next, and I saw Natasha after Dr. Norco, maybe the DOC, and then Natasha Pierre from there.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. So let me just comment on three things. The first will be in response to Chief Kenny's comment that if you recall at the last meeting, I mentioned the SAMHSA FEMA grant that DEMAS had received that's allowed us to expand our outreach services to vulnerable populations. That's mostly targeting congregate living settings, so it wouldn't necessarily target people in their homes. So I will try to see if folks in our various facilities have any feedback about this topic and any suggestions about helping the police with this increase in calls for welfare checks, and try to have some information available for our next meeting about that. With regard to COVID cases, obviously, we've seen increases in our facilities, just like we have everywhere around the state. In the last month, we've had about as much increase in cases as we had in the 3-month period from July to October. So definitely things are increasing. Fortunately, in our inpatient settings, we are able to relatively quickly isolate people to quarantine units. And so we've had good experience so far with being able to isolate outbreaks so that they don't continue to evolve and expand geometrically. And then the third thing I'll mention is a follow-up to a concern that I raised at the last meeting, which was about with the expansion of court operations and the increase in requests for competency to stand trial evaluations, we were having trouble meeting those needs with a number of restrictions on how we can do that work. We've had some great discussions with CSSD and Judicial in the last couple of weeks, and a particularly very helpful discussion with Judge Gold in the last few days. And we're going to start piloting a system of trying to bring defendants from a DOC facility to a courtroom where we know that we'll have a large open space in which 4 or 5 people can safely occupy the space and do the work. So we're going to be piloting that in Hartford with a couple of defendants from the Hartford Correctional Center the week after Thanksgiving, and hopefully that will go well, and then start introducing that in other courts around the state and try to take care of our backlog of doing these evaluations for people who are in custody. We're continuing to do the evaluations for people who are out in the community, but the ones in custody were becoming more difficult.
Thank you, Dr. Norco, and I appreciate any effort to provide follow-up, and perhaps we can just discuss between now and the next meeting whether there's any other information we can try to pull together on the topic of welfare, checking on welfare of individuals or other issues. As I saw in the minutes, because I think I missed that part of the meeting last month, you did indeed provide that update, and thanks for adding kind of greater accuracy and detail to it. And best wishes to the commissioner too, sir.
Yes.
I think Deputy Commissioner Sepulak, I'm so happy to see you here. And after you go, if you would like to, then our victim advocate, Natasha Pierre, the Board of Pardons and Paroles could go next. I'll keep working my way down the list. And feel free to turn your video on. That'll, if it may already be on, but I may not see it, then I'll be sure to call on you. Deputy Commissioner, would you care to go next?
Sure. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Just a quick update from the Department of Correction, and thank you to all of you who have mentioned us this morning. There have been several great ongoing partnerships. I'll start specifically by talking about technology, because we're working with several of you on our upgrades and expansions. We did launch video visits for our inmate population this week in 3 facilities, and we plan to have 2 additional online next week. So that's been a great way for us to connect our population to their families at a time when we've had to restrict movement in our facilities. And we expect to have the full rollout of video visits for our population by mid-December. So we're really excited about that. And kind of simultaneous, we're working with CSSD on the for the record and court hearings, adding to our expansion and our capabilities to do that. So I just want to thank everyone for your work with us, and also for your patience. Not easy to get these older buildings upgraded to the technologies of today. So I thank everyone for working with us through this. Over to COVID specific information, we do have 21 symptomatic inmates in our positive COVID unit at McDougall Walker. But overall, we just finished our round 3 of testing, and we're at less than 1% of the positivity rate. So heading in the right direction with our population. Unfortunately, we are seeing an increase with our staff in positivity rates. So we are keeping a close eye on that. To both of that, we are working with our providers and the state comptrollers on increasing our testing capacity. So starting hopefully next week, we'll be increasing our staff testing to weekly and our inmate testing to bi-weekly. So that'll give us more real-time information on where we are with our positivity rate and able to manage both from a staffing perspective and our population. Jumping over to population today, our count is 9,299. That is a 26% decrease from last year. So we're definitely heading in the right direction with those numbers. Pending any questions, Mark, that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I appreciate it. And the Commissioner's prioritization of technology improvements was well timed. I mean, no one knows the correctional facilities and their age. I think he said at the last meeting, the youngest facility is 26 years old. I'm probably off a couple of years, but the wiring work and the video conferencing and great work in setting up the in-person no contact visits. I mean, maintaining public health adherence and health and safety in the facilities while providing that extra ability to interact with loved ones is hard work, and these efforts all are well timed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Just to give everyone a bit of heads up for next steps, I think the Board of Pardons would go next, and then I see Director Begg, you'd be welcome to go next after that. And I'll keep an eye out for others who I might be missing. But Chairman Childs, it's great as always to see you, sir. You're next up, please.
Thank you so much. We just wanted to highlight the continued use of the transfer parole option that we have by statute and authority. So our order is still in effect. We're doing that. And we continue to process pardon applications to the tune of 2 hearings a month. We had 2 hearings in November, and we will have 2 hearings in December as well to continue processing those. And I'm sure Judicial, although we had a great relationship, is happy to hear that we've managed to pivot out of the courts to do that online only. So we're continuing to do our work. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Director Begg, the floor is yours if you are able to provide an update. Oh, here you are, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick update. We are continuing to work with all our criminal justice agency partners to provide the back-end solution to share information and provide an automated solution for arrest and a judicial process. We are working with all the other criminal justice agencies to share data. Primarily, the big problem right now is data quality and data cleanliness. And we work with Judicial as well as Board of Pardon and Parole, as well as DSPP to clean up the data as it goes through the system. We are also helping Division of Criminal Justice to bring data over from Judicial. That process should be completed sometime in February. That's when our first GA will be start to get fully automated, meaning from arrest to court proceedings through a judicial process. So that's where we are right now, and that's my quick update.
Thank you, Director. I appreciate it. And I saw CJPAC was well represented in Chief State's Attorney Colangelo's update last month, and I'm looking forward to circling back to you for a slot at a CJPAC meeting. I think next year we're looking at early next year.
Yeah.
Broader update.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah, I want to highlight all the data that we have available and that can be used to, use for analysis or predictive modeling. So it'll be a good opportunity for us to come and present at this meeting.
Terrific. Look forward to it. Stay safe and be well, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Natasha, I'm so sorry. I think I can blame it on the fact that whatever, I'm bad at taking notes, but I believe I had offered you the floor to go next, and after you, I think Attorney Rapillo. I'm so grateful to see her on the screen. But Natasha, do you have anything you wish to share with the group at this point?
I mean, like everyone else, we've been teleworking and trying to connect our clients to the systems and get them information. And as the judiciary branch reopens, we have more activity going on. I'm going to primarily, though, report on the Victims Issues Subcommittee. They have been meeting monthly, and actually some of these issues that have been addressed have been highlighted in that group and months now and starting to work on that process. And so we've been hearing this throughout. So it's it's great to hear it all come together, and that as much as possible, victim services are still being provided, and we're managing the court system as best as we can. But the Victims Issues Subcommittee also addressed a victim needs assessment. We had been talking about that for probably a year prior to now, and it's at the point where it's moving, and actually the judicial branch is funding it through an RFP process, and they're working closely with OPM to move that process along. But we're now at the point where once we get the RFP, we'll really be moving into the types of models to get the information we need. And we're very hopeful that we should really be deep into this project next year. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed attending the Victim Issue Subcommittee meetings. Thank you very much for dedicating the planning and the convening and bringing people together. And I'll hold for any, I might add something at the end about the victimization survey, but don't want to interrupt the flow, except to say thank you very much, Natasha, for your update. Appreciate it. And I think Chris, Attorney Rapillo, I think you're up next, man. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Just that we're continuing our efforts to engage with folks who may have had cases pending either at the beginning of the pandemic or cases that came up during the pandemic. We're now doing telephone public defender applications. So if folks are working with people who need to get reconnected with the court system or with their attorney or to apply for an attorney, all the details about that are both on our website and on the judicial branch website.
Thank you very much for mentioning that. And I was thinking of Attorney Day, John Day, at the earlier meeting about the flyers putting up around veteran services. And I was remembering in my mind how he was encouraging us to ask the question. And thank you for all you've done and really stretching your team and using innovative approaches to help people whose hearings have been delayed and are adjusting to a very different different kind of broader environment in our state and impact that has on trials, that the ways that your attorneys in your division are reaching out and making themselves available is helping people to really navigate the system, I think, on top of the representation and counsel you're providing. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
I wonder if I have omitted anybody. If anyone I've omitted, please feel free to say hello and provide your update, and apologies if I missed you earlier, but the floor is open. Okay. Great. Well, I'll just try to wrap up and say thank you very much again to our presenters today, to Lori and to Dan, to Karen and to Dan for their presentations. Clearly it elicited thoughtful discussion. And I, as always, Karen is imperturbable, even though I surprised a bit by bringing up the news of the transition before her speech, before her presentation. But as always, it's great to learn this issue and again see all the different ways.
One quick thing. So just thank you for allowing CCADV to present, especially on my last meeting. It's really we're grateful, and also, to be able to highlight the very authentic and real work of the advocacy community around systems change. And it's so well offered in these reports from a true perspective. And so we thank you for that. Also, just so people know, and many of you know him, Steve Epler-Epstein, who used to head up Connecticut Legal Services, will be serving as interim at CCADV. And so I look forward to you all working with him in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. The update I was going to share was just that as Natasha mentioned, there was a special meeting of the Victim Issue Subcommittee to look at the victimization survey and a broad array of other means of collecting data, victimization-related data, better identifying needs of victims, and then tailoring services to meet their needs. There's a close watch on developments in Congress regarding the Victims of Crime Act VOCA assistance authorization, and really a desire in the Victim Issue Subcommittee to use data to to help to capture the story, help to provide the stories of victims and survivors, but also identify the needs they have so that we can tailor our services accordingly more broadly. So late last month, there was a presentation provided by staff from the Council of State Governments Justice Center that pulled together a variety of different examples of ways states and counties and other jurisdictions are using such data. And it was a really thoughtful discussion that I will be providing more detail on in the future, but I wanted to just say thanks to Natasha for convening us and for everyone who worked together on that. Our next meeting is actually timed to be not the last Thursday of December as it normally is, but instead, actually not even, we've scheduled it for December 17th, Thursday, December 17th. Normally we'd meet the last Thursday of the month. This year that falls on New Year's Eve. And then for the previous Thursday, it's actually the Christmas Eve for those who celebrate. And so we've moved up to the 17th. So thank you for any calendar adjustments that you made to accommodate that change. It's one of the challenges of having a last Thursday of the month meeting typically. Thanks also for everyone meeting today in a virtual setting and for the lively and thoughtful conversation. You can feel the collaboration and communication happening despite the physical distance. This is a great convening opportunity for us to identify ways to work together. I hope everyone stays safe and wish you the very best health and safety, and look forward to coming together at our next meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.